mode.
Hello and welcome, everyone. We are super excited to have all of you here and super excited to have our presenters here. They are from Empower Work, and we're going to have a fabulous time with them. We have Jamie Alexis Fowler here. She's going to be your presenter. Val Sanders is also on the line to let all of you know she's traveling overseas with somewhat iffy internet connection, so she's going to be in and out. They're both here. Do ask your questions throughout. You've got two options for doing that. One is we will monitor the question panel all the way through, so you can do that anytime. And then the other option that all of you have is if you want to come on live and ask a question, if you raise your hand, I will monitor that as we go, and I can unmute you individually so that you can come on live and interact directly with both of our presenters. We will send an email to each of you afterwards. So if you want access to this information again, you will have it. And in addition, Jamie Alexis will be copied on that email. So if you want to reach out to her directly, you'll have that option as well. So Jamie Alexis, are you ready to have me flip this over to you?
Ready to roll.
All right, awesome. So everyone, I'm going to give Jamie Alexis the screen so that she can show you what she's got prepared for you. Jamie Alexis, it's all yours. There we go.
Well, I'm delighted to be here, Kathy. Thanks for that wonderful introduction. And just to share a little bit more, so I'm the founder and executive director of Empower Work, and we are a nonprofit that provides immediate confidential support for tough work situations, and we do it over text. So we started about 2 years ago, and I'll give a little bit of the overview, but I'm delighted to connect and chat with each of you because we see the importance and the fundamental really transformation that can happen when you bring coaching into situations where otherwise people wouldn't have it. Oops, I skipped a slide. So for today's conversation, we're going to give a quick overview of what Empower Work is, why we started, and then we're going to dive into the volunteer experience and talk about sort of why we're structured to have volunteers and what the benefits are of volunteering, and some of the differences between coaching in a face-to-face environment, which many of you may be used to, and coaching over text, or in some cases we also do web chat as well. And then hopefully if we have some time, we'll get to a little bit of practice. And we'll do questions and answers at the end, but as Kathy mentioned, please feel free to jump in and ask questions at any point if something isn't clear. We want to make sure that we're covering everything that you're curious about. And so with that, we'll jump right in. So what's Empower Work? So 2 years ago, around the time of the Susan Fowler Uber memo, which some of you may be familiar with, when headlines were raging about problematic work situations for a range of folks, someone in my personal network connected to me and was really grappling with a really challenging situation. And we talked through what she had faced, and I left the conversation thinking, what she needed was something much more immediate, much more tied to the situation she had faced. She had gone through something several weeks prior and had leveraged the heck out of her LinkedIn network to connect to me. And ultimately, by that point, it was sort of like, yeah, we had a fruitful conversation, and I think she left feeling better. But I think what she needed was something that was much closer to what she'd experienced. And so I started searching around to see, and of course there are a range of amazing coaching platforms and coaching resources, but for most working Americans, those are not accessible. And so I started digging into this question of how could we better support people? And what I found in the research across hundreds of surveys and over 200 interviews with folks ranging from organizational psychologists to HR professionals to labor and employment attorneys was that these tough situations, these sort of gut punch moments, are almost universal. So in our research, about 94% of people had experienced them, but about 80% of those we researched didn't have access to a resource. And so that might be, we had people who were like, what's an EAP? Or I work somewhere where there's no HR, or why would I trust HR? And it's not that they don't believe strongly in the power of that, But when you're working at a small company where maybe you're the only person of color and the HR rep is best friends with the owner, there's a trust factor involved. And we saw in our research that those who were most impacted by not having access to a resource were often those in the workplace with less social capital. So that included women, people of color, folks with disabilities, people who were first in their family or first generation to go to college or join an industry. And we saw that when they didn't have a resource, they were more likely to leave a job with no next job lined up, leave a job and take a pay cut, or leave an industry altogether. And we saw that this was cumulatively adding up over time. And the woman that I spoke to was an example of that. She was first generation to join the industry that she was in, and she had no one in her family or her personal network to talk to about what she'd faced. And she had huge student loans, and she couldn't afford to contact a coach. She didn't even know what a coach was, and she wasn't sure where her issue fell. Was it legal? Was it something that needed coaching? Where was this situation? So as I mentioned, we looked at sort of how could we change this? What could we do to meet people where they are and to provide a space where they could grapple with the situation that they were facing? And so in addition to the research, we launched a pilot. And so we thought, okay, based on what we've seen, people expressed that they really wanted something that met them where they were, right? So there had something happen at work, maybe a tough run-in with a manager, and they're thinking about it on the bus. Or they walk out of their meeting with their manager and like go to the bathroom and text a friend. And we saw that the pattern of behavior was, folks were definitely reaching out for support, but they didn't feel like the people they were reaching out to maybe had the resource or the information needed. And they also didn't want to be overheard where they were thinking about this. So, if they're thinking about their work situation on the bus, they don't really want to have a voice conversation. Or if they're in their office at that point, again, they kind of don't, they don't want anyone to hear. So we decided to test whether or not texting would be a viable way to provide this support. And what we found was that overwhelmingly people texted us, which was amazing. So we moved from pilot to full-scale launch in 2018. And we've now, in the past year and a half, we've supported people across 45 states. We have volunteers in every time zone. And it's truly incredible to see the impact that this is having. When people have a resource, they feel heard and supported. And we have folks who tell us, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. I've never had access to something like this before. And we really combine the power of coaching with a little bit of counseling, and we'll talk about how our approach is slightly different, as well as information and resources. And we see that that's really important. When someone's concerned about losing a job, sometimes they're worried about their healthcare benefits. Where do I find information about healthcare? What does this look like? So in addition to the power of technology to meet people where they are, we also see, sorry, my slide froze. We also see that this gap that I mentioned, where an individual might be unsure, their company might have some support, but they're not sure if they want to access it. Their community might have some support, but they may not have all the information. And of course, there's policy and government if someone wanted to report, but it seems often very distant. In addition to the power of meeting people where they are, our approach we really see has an impact, can have an impact at the system sort of change level. And so the way that we do that is we work with groups like Year Up or Tech Ladies or Women Who Code, affinity professional community groups to provide a resource for their community. And then we also provide insights back into what we're seeing in the workplace. So we'll share trends in terms of like, we're seeing an increase in bullying, or we're seeing an increase in concerns about healthcare benefits, as I mentioned. Like, we want to share that back in an anonymous aggregate way to help inform what's happening in workplaces so that we see change across the board. So I'll pause there before I dive into the volunteer experience and just see if there are any questions about sort of who we are and what we're doing and how we're going about it. Checking the chat. Cool. So I don't see any questions, so I'm going to dive right into the volunteer experience. So we are thrilled to have working professionals, as I mentioned, across the United States who use their expertise and their skills to support people at these tough moments. And we see incredible change and transformation for the volunteers who express great appreciation for being able to give back. I mean, they see incredible need in the conversations and feel like they're really making a difference in people's lives. But it also really helps build skills. So, Kathy and I were talking about, when you're thinking about going through a coaching certification program, or maybe you're in the midst of that, or maybe you've already gone through Coach Cert. Empower Work often provides a space to practice skills that you already have and a different way. It's like an exercising a different muscle. And we hear over and over again that volunteers often learn something new in our training, and they bring that back to their workplaces. And whether that workplace is they're a coach or they're working in HR, that it really shifts the way that they show up in their day-to-day. So a little bit about who our volunteers are. We have coaches, we have product managers, we have communications consultants, we have a chef who has run like multiple restaurants and businesses and like sees how important this is for workers in her space. We have consultants, we have folks who do user research. Like across the spectrum, we have incredible volunteers who really care about people having support and resources at these critical moments. Oh, and this is a little bit more about how people see the difference. We have people who are both new to coaching and who are deepening their skills. And we've seen that established coaches really find that this additional element can help deepen what they see. And part of that is, as I mentioned, we have a little bit of magic in our approach, as Val likes to say, Empower Work magic. And part of that is it's different in the sense that we're only having one conversation with people. And really the big impetus for that is someone's feeling really stuck. And we help people with our approach move from feeling stuck, overwhelmed, unsure, really maybe confused about where to go, to action. And so it's about creating that space for someone to think through what they want to do, and then coming up with a bit of a game plan for what's next. Sorry, I hit the slide, but not. Oh, there we go. Okay. So a little bit of difference between traditional coaching and Empower Work. As I mentioned, we are just one situation. We do have people who come back, and it might be like an evolving scenario. So for instance, someone receives a performance improvement plan, a surprise performance improvement plan on a Thursday, and they talk with one of our counselors and come up with how they want to approach things. And then Monday morning comes and new information arises in relation to that situation. And so they might reach back out again and say, hey, something changed and I've got this new info. And we do see that people come back, like someone who reached out last year at the very beginning of the year for something positive, like they were negotiating a promotion, which was really exciting, came back later in the year because they were facing a more problematic situation. But it's not a long-term relationship. So also different from coaching. Most coaching at this point is still done in person, or some people are increasingly doing phone or video, which is amazing. And ours are all text or web chat, and they're all anonymous. So we don't know anything about what's happening for the person on the other end unless they share that information. And so it's like you're just walking in, you're like, you don't know if how the person identifies, what their demographics are, where they are in the country. Sometimes you don't even know what industry they're in. And we find that, some people like to share that and some people don't, like what they're really grappling with. The benefit that we see is that they feel like their information is totally confidential, that there's no judgment, that we're totally third party, There's no concern that this is going to get back to their company or people they work with. And they can feel like it's a really completely non-judgmental space. We see, in traditional coaching that often the coach and the client will design that structure together. And on our approach, we always ask for permission, we ask for opt-in, but rather than structuring it together, we have an approach that we see works best for text conversations, and it's flexible. So it's structured and it has parameters, but it's also, we have room for if someone really needs more, let's say, emotional support, we can focus there. If someone's really focused on action planning, we can focus there. Coaches may or may not refer to additional resources. And in our case, we feel like it's really important for our mission, and particularly for the demographics that we're serving, that if we see an opportunity to check in with someone about more information, we do that and we'll provide it. So I'll share an example. We'll have someone reach out who might say, my paycheck has a different amount this time, and I've noticed this happening, and I don't know, I'm not sure why my paycheck is different the last 3 sessions. Well, there could be a variety of reasons why their paycheck is different. But to go back to the demographics, they might be first in their family or first generation, or maybe they're really early career and they've never had this happen before. Maybe they've never had a conversation with HR or payroll about that. It's also possible, wage theft is very common, unfortunately, in the US, and it's possible that they could be facing something like wage theft and not know that that's even a thing, right? And so we will very lightly check in with the person to understand the situation, and if needed, ask for permission to share some resources if it would be helpful. It's always with the intention of what's the person's goal, what do they want to accomplish, and how can we best support them towards that goal. So we only share resources if that's something they express interest in. We also see a difference between traditional coaching and empower work in the sense that, oftentimes when clients are working with coaches, there's they've proactively sought that coach out. They understand what coaching is. Their quote unquote like readiness for coaching is quite high. And we see on our side that there's a range of readiness. And sometimes, there's uncertainty because, they don't necessarily know what to expect, and that's normal. And in a lot of cases, people aren't looking for a coach per se. They're looking just for help with their work challenge. And so we, often kind of need to walk through and create that trust in the beginning of the conversation and the ability to go deeper. The similarities are that in both cases, traditional coaching and with empower work, the focus is really on the person. It's helping the person figure out their path. And so we see this in terms of someone might be experiencing, as I mentioned, like wage theft. They may not be calling it that, and they may not even be interested in, their primary goal may not be trying to figure out the wage theft situation. Their primary goal might be, I'm concerned about paying rent. And so we've got to really focus on how can they get the financial coverage that they need, or talk through the internal channels in order to do that. Our goal is always, we ask questions that are always in the person's interest, never in our interest. And we use the same basic tools in coaching, powerful, open questions, strong reflection, deep listening. We have a couple of guys.
May I add something on there?
Oh, yes.
Hi, everyone. This is Val Sanders. I'm the Director of Training and Volunteers for Empower Work. I am so thrilled to be here, even though I am in a bit of a busy place, so hopefully the sound is okay. I am a certified coach myself, and I love working with our volunteers. It is the most amazing work I have ever done. It is fantastic. What Jamie Alexis was just saying is so true, that Empower Work, if you are interested in it, Empower Work will give you exposure to a range of people that you are unlikely to encounter, I think, in any other coaching environment that I have heard of. Literally, because the surface is anonymous and via text, there's a really low barrier to people texting us. We will get people who are literally terrified and have no idea what their options are. We will get people at the other end of the spectrum who are really ready to be empowered, and you can do some really traditional coaching with, there is an enormous range of what people's situations are, what their backgrounds are, what they're ready for. It is a fantastic experience in learning how to meet people where they are, because people coming to us are coming from everywhere. It is so huge and so broad, and that will stretch your range as a coach in ways that I have never seen anywhere else. So I just wanted to, Jamie Alexis, you were spot on. I wanted to call that out because I think that's really important about us.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point. Thanks, Val, for chiming in. Because we see people who are reaching out who are everything from, window installers to restaurant workers to folks working in tech. It's a huge range of industries and places where people are in their career. I should mention, I didn't reference some of our demographics, but we see about 78% of folks who reach out who share information about themselves indicate that they identify as a woman. About 57% identify as a person of color. About 18% identify as LGBTQ. We see a range of folks who will share elements of maybe an invisible disability, such as a learning difference. There's often a huge amount of financial concern related to the situation. And about 54% are in the first 10 years of working. So it is a very, as Val mentioned, it's a different population than I think most coaches typically work with. So our guiding principles are very in line, I think, with a lot of coaching, which is that people accessing us are their own best decision maker. We want texters to walk away feeling heard, supported, and able to take a next step for them. And one of the things that we hear from folks is, things like at the end of a conversation, someone said to a volunteer, like, are you a fairy godmother for a work? I mean, these are, it's like these transformative conversations. And people, will say, like, this is the first time that I've felt that someone really understands what I'm going through. And part of that, part of those responses are that we really position the conversations where people they're the expert in their experience and they're the expert in what they want to see happen. And as I mentioned, when needed, we want texters to have information that might be helpful. And we'll see people ask us that, like, this feels off to me, like, is this normal in the workplace? And we want to be able to say, yeah, unfortunately, going through an offer negotiation sometimes isn't as positive, right? I mean, sometimes it's like, yeah, this is actually kind of just part of the modern workplace, or just what, things that happen, or no, that, what you've described does not seem normal. It's not typical in a workplace. And another big piece of our guiding principles is that we want all of our volunteers to feel like they're increasing professional skills and contributing in a meaningful way. So the volunteer experience is really, really important for us. And over the past year, as I mentioned, we've trained hundreds of volunteers across the United States. And in some ways, it's been a co-designed process. We constantly want to get feedback from volunteers to understand sort of what could make an even better experience. How can we learn from one another? How can we really center this in a way where everyone's walking away feeling like this is a benefit to them? So as I mentioned, our conversations are confidential. And so this is an actual conversation that's sort of drawn with permission to share. But it's a situation that that we see frequently. So someone reaching out and saying, I'm struggling to get along with my manager. He's brand new. Every conversation we have is contentious. I don't know what to do, and I'm worried about my growth in the company. And we see a wide range of dimensions, including agency. So a lot of situations where people just feel like they have no power in the situation, and that's a big piece of why they're feeling stuck. The sense that, like, they're not really sure how to take ownership. So where do they go? Who do they have a conversation with? In a number of cases, people have actually already taken a number of steps and just aren't really sure. We see a lot of very high emotion conversations. So we see a range, but in many cases, people feel like their livelihood is on the line. So we'll see situations where we've had texters reach out and say, I'm being asked to sign this severance agreement in the next hour, and I'm not sure what to do. And we don't provide legal advice, but we, see that like the emotional high of that, like I'm in the midst of losing my job, and I'm being asked to sign this thing, and I'm not sure what to do, is quite high. And then we see that, again, because of the demographics, the questions are kind of across the gamut. Is this normal? Is this typical? I'm unsure what to think about this. And that's, that can be tricky. So what do we do in these situations? Whoops, I'm having a slide delay here.
I'm just so excited to see the answer.
It's like every time I press the slide, it's like there's a little delay.
Yeah.
Nope. Okay, so what do we do? So we approach it to dive in to understand, what's bothering the texter the most about the situation. And that's incredibly powerful because, as I mentioned, in some scenarios, like the one that I just referenced, where the person's saying, oh, this is so contentious with my manager. And you can read the situation and think like, okay, the thing that's bothering them the most is this relationship with the manager. And then, we talk to them and we realize like, actually, what's really bothering them the most is like they're worried about their career trajectory in the company. They're really diving in and understanding like what is most challenging about what they're facing. And then keying into what do they want to see happen. And again, this could be so varied. For some, it's like, I just want to leave the company, like this isn't working for me and they want to plot their exit path. For some people, it's something really simple. Like, I just want my manager to, to put a meeting on my calendar when we have conversations. Like it doesn't work for me when they just like fly by my desk all the time. So there's quite a range of what that can be, and trying to really understand, again, sort of putting them forefront. They're the expert in what they want and what they understand of the situation. What would ideally the outcome be that they'd want? And then what will they do about it? And so we want to see, not every conversation is exactly this structure, but we do want people to walk away with a sense of agency, because so often when people enter a conversation, they're feeling completely powerless. We want someone to walk away feeling like they have some kind of action step, next step, game plan, a bit of like, I have some control in what's going on and what I'm facing.
And Jamie, Alexis, this is Val again. I will add on there again. That's, in coach speak, right? That's really about the texter who's coming to us being at choice. Because we have had, long, deep conversations with people who their decision at the end is simply, I need to let go. And I am choosing to let go and to move on. And you've helped that person process the emotion and get to that realization that I have tried everything I could and I need to let go. And so sometimes choosing to not take action is action in itself. But it's about that person feeling like they know what's right for them and they're in charge, right? So, or it could be they walk away with literally like 5 ticky boxes of the things they're really excited that they're going to do. We support all of that. Again, it's about what's right for the person. And if they walk away realizing that it's just with a realization that it's time to let go as an outcome, that can be an incredibly powerful outcome, just as much as having actions that they can actually like go and take in a traditional kind of action planning kind of sense. We support all of that.
Absolutely. That's a great point. Thanks for chiming in with that, Val. And I will just add an anecdote for that. We had a texter right before Thanksgiving, actually a couple weeks before Thanksgiving, who reached out, and they've been in a really toxic situation for quite a number of years, actually. And it was coming to a head, and they were worried about losing their job. And we coached them through the situation, and they left, I think really to Val's point, they left with a sense of like, it might just be a situation in which they need to think about letting some aspects of it go, because it had gotten to the point where there just wasn't likely going to be a resolution. And a couple weeks after the conversation, actually it was like a day before Thanksgiving, the person reached back out to us and said, I mean, it's like brings me to tears. I can't tell you what an impact that conversation had. They said, I did lose my job. But because of the conversation that I had with Empower Work, I'm going to Thanksgiving with my family. And if I hadn't had that conversation, I'm not sure I would have been able to face this meeting up with my family. And it was so powerful because to think that someone would have been so overwhelmed or embarrassed or distraught going in, that they wouldn't spend time with their family at such an important time of year in what was important for them to do. It's those kind of moments where you see sort of this power of human connection for someone who may not otherwise have a resource like this. And so we see quotes, regularly from texters who say things like, I could never repay you, or this is like the most incredible thing, I've experienced, which is really, really transformative. And it means a lot to the volunteers. And oftentimes feedback is shared in the midst of conversations. Like the texter will stop and say like, oh my gosh, like, this is so amazing. Like, how did you get involved? Or like, how did you find out about this? Or like, what inspired you to volunteer? Like, this is so great. And seeing that connection is truly transformative. So some of the differences between coaching in a traditional sense and coaching over text is that although we're working towards the same outcomes, we're doing it with a lot less. So, one of our board members, who's an organizational psychologist, when she and I first chatted about the possibility of Empower Work, she was like, there's no way you can do coaching over text. Like, and then we worked on our approach together, and she started to see some of the outcomes, and she was like, this is incredible. One of the things that it forces is brevity. And as you can see by me telling all this information, I'm not always great at brevity verbally, but I have had to practice it in a written format because we have to stick to a character count. We have to get as much in to a question or to a snippet in as few words and as few characters as possible, which is an art and a muscle that has to get built. We also find that like the deep listening that's so critical is different in a written environment than it is in person, where you have cues about someone's physicality or their tone or things like that. And what we see is that sometimes that's coming across in a pause, in the length of time it takes for someone to respond. Sometimes, and it's like listening in to those gaps, like what are they saying? What are they not saying? Are they, sharing really short 3 to 4 to 5 word responses? We had someone the other day who was just like, the volunteer almost felt like they were kind of stretching themselves to get this person to go deeper. And then they asked this one question, and suddenly the person went from 3 to 4 3 to 4 word sentences to multiple sentences all at once, because the volunteer had really heard how stuck this person was, and had said, had reflected that back. And even though the person wasn't sharing that much, the counselor was able to key in by that deep listening and help that person realize just how stuck they were, which they knew, but it was, it's different to have it reflected back. We also see that really awesome volunteers are excellent at hearing themes or catching keywords or phrases or reflecting back something that might have happened in the beginning of a conversation and cueing back to that. Identifying the values and the beliefs and the assumptions of what's happening with the texter. And the kind of the baseline of that is really helping articulate what's going on. So hearing what's happening and then being able to reflect it back is incredibly powerful. I see, Kathy, it looks like there are a couple of questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, since I messaged you on that, there's more has come in. So the first question that came up is, when people are doing this volunteer coaching via text, is the time recognized by ICF as coaching hours?
It's a great question. It is not currently, but it's something that we are actually, we've looked into, we're starting to look into, because we've had people expressing and interest in that. So it's on our radar, but it does not currently count. Is that right, Val? Tell me if I'm wrong there.
That is correct. And it is something we need to explore, because I know ICF does have, this is anonymous, but the ICF does have arrangements like with schools and companies around the organization certifying hours. So if that is something that is important to you, simply reach out to us and let us know, and we can kind of, try to move that along a little more quickly.
Awesome. Thank you. And then the next question that came in is, somebody said that they find when people are texting back and forth, they take that extra time to think through their responses a bit more, maybe in a different way, and they can see how effective that can be. And then they went on to say, with that being said, a sort of one situation communication, is there any follow-up that is provided to the texter or asked for, or do you find that once people reach out, they follow up on their own?
Great questions. And yes, I mean, that's such an important component of it being written, is that we have people who will say, like, I started to type one thing and then that question made me think about it differently. And I hadn't thought about it that way before, so there is a lot of power. There's power in verbal communication, and there's incredible power in someone writing it as well. And so we see that that's really transformative for a number of people, both the volunteers and the texters. Because we'll see volunteers also do the same thing, where they're like, I started writing this question and I realized like it really didn't hit the mark of what I was trying to do. And so I rewrote it, and that allows like a pause and a different muscle exercise than if you're just going, boom, boom, back and forth with someone in person or over video or that sort of thing. So yes, to the point about follow-up, the question about follow-up, we follow up with folks to check in, because it's very important for us to understand and very critical for us to understand, like, what's the impact of the model that we've built. And we want to always make sure that we're paying attention and honed in to what do people most need, and are we meeting those needs in the ways that we intend. And so we will ask people immediately after a conversation for feedback in a survey, and we see incredibly high response rates to that. And from that immediate survey, we see that about 90% of people leave feeling better in the immediacy. And they provide feedback and suggestions, and overwhelmingly people, like, sometimes people are like, my only suggestion is, like, everybody should know about you. like we're like, okay, but tell us, like, things that would improve. And then we follow up with folks a couple of weeks after as well, with a slightly different survey, and we ask things. Oh, and I should say, in that first survey as well, we ask, did they feel heard? Did they feel like the counselor had a good understanding of their situation? Did they trust the counselor? And by the way, we use the term counselor typically because that's what texters have told us they feel like the person should be called. And we've been asking for a while, like, do you feel like the person on the other side is a coach or a counselor? And I think for those in the coaching world, when you look at the model, it's very heavily coaching. But we find, again, that sort of with our demographics, most people aren't familiar with coaching. And so for them, the closest word is often counselor. But we're continuing to respond to the feedback that we see, because, again, we want to be really human-centered. If someone feels like the person on the other end is X, like, we're going to call them X because that's what meets people best where they are. But we're also interested in helping people understand about coaching too. So yeah, we follow up immediately after, and then we follow up a few weeks as well. And in addition, we do see people organically reach out. And so even, before we'll check in with them a few weeks later, we'll have people who will just text us again and say, like, hey, my conversation with Sarah was so amazing. And by the way, here's what happened when I talked to my manager, which for us is really, I think, it sort of shows the power of that connection and the power that this one conversation can have. And there's a lot of research, particularly in psychology, that shows the power of critical, positive and negative moments, and what those can mean. And so there's incredible power in deeper relationships. And I think there's this incredible power where if someone's at this moment of like gut punch, overwhelming, having that critical support can really be pathway altering in a lot of ways. So Kathy, you mentioned there were some other questions. So any
Yeah, no,
others
actually you've covered it.
Okay.
Yeah, you're good. Awesome. And please, everyone, keep those questions coming in. Feel free to type in more.
Yes.
Oh, wait. Let me back up. Okay. So it said, this also seems helpful if the texter can look back and review their conversation for those who need to review what was said. Is this something you have heard as a positive response from the texter?
Yes, that's such a great point. It's like clearly the folks who are listening are really good at deep listening and listening between the lines, because that is absolutely. I love that like someone's visualizing that of like, oh, how would I use this? We actually see people both in like web chat and in text who say like some people in web chat will say like, oh, I just like did a screen grab of my conversation, or I like printed the conversation, because one of the pieces, and I'm sorry that I didn't mention this, is that we'll often practice with people. So like if you're going to go have, sometimes people want to go have a conversation with HR, but they've never had that conversation. And so they're like, okay, here's my goal in the conversation. Here's what I want to accomplish. And then we'll actually role play with them. And so, we'll see people practice, what they want to say to the person. And then they'll keep a copy of it afterwards. And they're like, oh, I went back. We actually had someone who's now a volunteer. When they were looking at us as a volunteer opportunity, they were actually in the midst of a tough situation themselves. And the story's in a blog on our website, and I'm happy to share it, but they used us as a texter, and then they're now a volunteer. And one of the things that they said was like, they left the conversation with like a 6-month game plan, and they've kept it on their phone, and they've actually like gone back and referenced that game plan over the course of that period. So we see, again, the power of like having something that's written is you can go back and reference it, whether that's like, here's the email that I'm thinking about writing to my manager, or, I role played this conversation with someone, which is really, really powerful.
Nice.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about the fact that we have a range of coaches who are part of the community, and there's this real benefit, as I mentioned at the outset, of like being able to use the existing skills you have in different ways, add to that. It's almost putting more tools in your tool belt, so to speak. And so Kelly, who's one of our volunteers, is one of the coaches. And Val went back and like checked in with folks and was like, hey, what has this meant to you? And we actually, just as we survey our texters, we also regularly survey our volunteers. And so we've heard incredible feedback. And so this is Kelly's, and she's like, the other day she's like, I've gotten so much better at phrasing questions, and I take those back into my regular coaching as well. And so we've seen that that's super, super powerful. Val, is there anything I missed there? Because I know you were talking with a range of the volunteers who are coaches.
Yes, I think we've talked about the exposure, right, to the range of texters, to the powerful questions, to deep listening, which we'll talk about a little bit more. I think a little further on is you have that so much less material, but it is amazing how much you have to work with in a few words. And again, that brevity can just really allow you to hone your skills. I will add, sometimes our coaches go through our training really quickly, and sometimes they don't. It can also be challenging. And as you said with texters, Jamie Alexis, you need the good and the bad are both important. This can be a really challenging experience. We have every person who has been, every volunteer who has been on the line for a significant amount of time, us, have had times that we haven't helped people. We've lost texters who disengaged, who've had really hard experiences supporting people. And I think what I have seen and heard from our coach volunteers is that they are getting stretched. They're having some amazing, impactful conversations where they just walk away feeling like, I just had a real impact. I just changed somebody's life, right? This is amazing. And times that are deeply challenging as well. And I think for a coach, that can be really hard because we feel like we're coaches, right? We're good at this. But as we know, being coaches, right, being able to fail is an important challenge for us too. And so I have seen that is really important.
Wow.
The willingness to fail.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And Val, while we have you live, the question came in, how do you train the volunteers and how many hours?
And actually, I was going to say,
yeah.
I saw that question and I was going to say, can we answer that in like 3 slides? Because we have an overview.
Of course. Yeah.
Cool.
Awesome. We're going to get, I'm so glad that you're like preempting that. I think, Val, we have time to do a little practice if you want to lead, a little interactive exercise here.
I'd love to. We can do this really fast. This is actually pulled out of our training. These 2 slides are part of our training, and they're part of the training that is focused on listening deeply. We spend a lot of time focused on listening deeply because we get so few words. We talk about we're listening through the words for thoughts, certainly always for feelings and emotions. We're listening to those word choices that give us those clues that there's something here that we want to go further and deeper down into. We listen for beliefs. We always listen for values, especially in that opening where we're really trying to figure out why is the situation so important to the texter? Why is this their big challenge? Because people do not come to us with little challenges. They come to us with places they really feel stuck. We listen for their values because they help us understand what's at stake for the person. You can listen by a text for what is not being said. I have seen some beautiful reflections for volunteers who just caught that what the person was dancing around. Very often, like in the example that Jamie Alexis called out before, where somebody, it's the relationship with the boss. Very often, there's something unsaid around what's stopping them from taking action that people will not necessarily address. So you listen for those. Listen for what's holding people back. And every time I do this in training and say what else, our amazing training groups come up with at least 2 things that I have not thought of, that are not on the slide, that they are listening for. And I love that because there is no limit to the things you can be listening for. So let's actually shoot ahead to the next slide, because this is what we do. We practice. We get 1 text that a texter sends us. And so this was a real text we got. I just got written up for missing work to take my kid to the doctor when he had an asthma attack. I'm not sure what to do. I am 1 point away from being fired. So I'm going to actually ask you all to be game and to put on your coach hats and listen. Look in that. Do you see values? Do you see beliefs? Do you see assumptions? Do you see feelings?
And you're welcome to either raise your hand and come on live to interact with Val, or type it in the question panel and we can feed that to them. So
Kathy, I'll count on you here since I can't see.
Yeah, I'm hearing everybody think, and when they get things in there, I'll certainly pass them on. I've got a hand up. Deborah, I see your hand up. Your telephone is not connected. You have to dial in your audio pin on your phone to be able to come on live. In the meantime, I've got a message in. Val, if you dial audio pin pound, then I can bring you in, or Deborah, I'll be able to bring you in live. Susan commented value of family that she heard with that message. So that was a great one. What else, everyone?
That is a fantastic one. Yeah.
Let's see. Somebody, Stephanie also said family. Tim said exasperated. Sheila said the family child is primary. Anella said what's not being said. Feelings including fear and anger. Let's see. The one who's I can't bring in live. She said family as well. So a lot of awareness
Oh, I can
around
tell
that
I am on a call
family.
with coaches. I love this. Sometimes with non-coaches, it takes a little while to get there to the family ones. So thank you all. That is amazing. Yes, these are all the things we listen for. When we have non-coaches on, they often pick up on the 1 point away from being fired one first. Sometimes I say that as a belief, then that's something we need to explore further, because people will call out, like, what does 1 point away from being fired mean? That could be pure hyperbole. And that could mean that they work in a workplace where that's actually some kind of point system, and they've been told they have 2 points. And, you know, if they get to 3, they're out. I don't know. I'm not there, right? So these are the pieces we get to explore. And I think there's 100 great ways you could respond to this texter. I love how predominantly you picked up on that family value, because my favorite response to this is your kid okay? Because then you're building, are clearly the child's importance to the texter is core to their values, and you're building trust and showing them that you care about them. And so that's probably what you would do if this person sat down across from you as a coach, right? It's not fundamentally any different. So that's a lot of what we teach. We teach around the structure of the conversation, and we teach, like, how do you listen for these things and what do you do with them when you've got this anonymous person you know nothing about. And again, coaches very often go through our training and then through the practice phase, which we'll talk about in a minute, very quickly. So those were all excellent observations. I wanted to make sure, did we have anyone who wanted to actually speak up as well before we move on?
Yeah, the one person who's not able to come on live, and they got their comment in there. So we're good.
Great.
Awesome. Well, thank you. That was beautiful, deep listening. See, it's like, okay, these coaches are totally going to have this, and you all did. So impressed. So let's move on. Yeah.
Yeah, I know we've got just a couple minutes left, so I want to make sure that we definitely address what it's like to go through the training. And one of the things I wanted to add into that sort of addition to the power of listening is that one of the other additional powers here is that it's not coaching just in a silo. We actually sometimes coach as a team. So sometimes when there are situations where you may not know the direction a conversation is going, or you're not sure what's working, one of the secret secret sauce, so to speak, is that the way that our system is built, you can kind of raise your hand in the system and say, like, I don't know what, like, I need some help. And there's always backup. So it's amazing because we're able to sometimes, coach one another, have like collaborations behind the scenes. And we'll see that different people sometimes, hear or identify different things, and having someone come in and say, like, oh, that question was so amazing. And also, I noticed that they said blah, 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 like, have you touched base on the blah, blah, blah piece? And the power of having a live team that's around what's going on is also, I think, a big benefit that helps both improve one's skills and also feel like it's kind of like it's almost like a team sport in a different way. A couple of
coaching a client, and you actually have like a little earbud in your ear where someone, you could like feel stuck and be like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. And someone be like, well, how about trying this? Or, asking you a question. It is amazing. You basically, that is one of the amazing things about this model is you're never alone. And that, so thank you, Jamie, Alexis, I totally cut in there, but I want to stress like what you get out of that is incredible. Mm-hmm. It's that you do not just have to rely on yourself.
Absolutely. And so to kind of wrap up a bit of our overview, and then we'll go into the how does volunteering work, and I want to make sure that the people have any other questions that they get answered. But a couple, just a highlight of some of the favorite coaching tools that we use that are very fundamental, that you probably use already. And some of our favorite ones that we see are most powerful over text are validating the emotion, letting the person know that they're not alone, acknowledging how important it is of what they're experiencing. So like, is your child okay? You know, checking in with them. And, you know, one of the biggest values that we offer is that it can feel so isolating when you're stuck and shameful and embarrassing and disconcerting, and offering this space of like, it's okay to that's totally normal to feel that way. And like, we're here, is really, really powerful. One of the other elements that we find is incredibly transformative is reframing. So, you know, we are different than the person's partner or their best friend or someone else they might reach out to, because in a lot of ways they're open to exploring different perspectives on the situation from us. We have no skin in the game. We're totally third party. Our interest is totally in what is going to be best for them. And so being able to take a step back and ask them, you know, hey, let's take a step back together and look at this. And it can be really transformative. I keep using that word, but it's true. We're the volunteer to help the person see the big picture and do it together, taking a long view. And suddenly you kind of see this shift in the weight that they've been carrying and their ability to kind of move somewhere else. And then acknowledging the texture for their values, their accomplishments, their bravery. And I think so often we see people who are caught up in like, okay, I just got a promotion. They'll mention like, I just got a promotion and I just got this thing. And then they're really stuck on this one negative thing. It's like, oh my gosh, like you just got this promotion. That's amazing. You know, things like that. So we want to acknowledge that. So I see some questions coming in, and I know we also have this question about what the process is for volunteering. So I want to quickly run through the volunteering application, and then I will jump into these 3 questions that I see Kathy has posted here. So the volunteering process works, it's pretty simple. We have an application on our website. So if you go to empowerwork.org, you'll see there's a volunteer tab, and you can also, or /volunteer. Sign up to say you're interested. You'll receive the application in your email. It's a pretty straightforward application where we just want to understand what motivates folks to get involved and ask some questions about how they approach things. Then everyone goes through an interview and reference process because we want to make sure just like that we're connecting texters to really awesome people, and we believe strongly that if you're part of this community, that's probably aligned. But we always want to make sure that we check and we have the same process for everybody. And then everyone goes into a training. And the training currently is about 20 hours. It's done over Zoom, another web platform. Mm-hmm. And we're also integrating a learning management system into that process as well. So it'll be in the next couple of months, it'll be a combination of both individual learning that you can do through our learning management system, as well as interactive trainings done over video. Once you go through the kind of official video trainings and practice through the LMS, you actually go into a round of practice conversations with other folks where you're able to kind of exercise those skills and get up to speed, and you get feedback on those conversations before you move into live conversations. So that's a bit of the process. The commitment that we ask for is about 2 hours a week for 6 months, and people can structure that in different ways. We're flexible. Some volunteers like to, you know, okay, I do my volunteering every Monday morning from 9 to 11. And other people are part of what we call our flex program, which is they kind of tap in when we have higher volume of texters because they have a flexible work environment. Again, we want to meet people where they are. And so for volunteers, that might be they love to structure it and have their time set. And for other people, they're like, hey, like just let me know when there's someone available and I'll jump in. So I see 3 questions from Kathy. How is the resource promoted to folks in the workplace? Time commitment, I just addressed that a little bit. And then volunteers, how are volunteers of the organization protected from legal or liability? So the first point around how we share Empower work. A lot of people find us through organic search. We also partner very intentionally with organizations and groups that reach folks who are underrepresented or under-resourced in a work environment. So that includes groups like the YMCA in Hunters View Bay Point in San Francisco that does incredible workforce training for underserved population in San Francisco. Every time someone graduates from their program, they get Empower Works information. So they can contact their counselor at YMCA 100 Views Bay Point, but they can also connect with one of our counselors. And we see that that's incredibly powerful to support people not just into the workforce, but to have that support once they're in it. We also reach people through a variety of we had 500 donated bus ads that were shared with us, which was amazing. And then the protection on legal liability, we have everyone who engages with our service has to agree to our terms of service and our privacy policy. And we are very clear, and as part of the training we walk through, we don't provide legal advice. We have boundary setting approaches for that, and we have a team of lawyers both on our board and as advisors who we regularly check in with to make sure that we are within the bounds of what we want to claim. But our terms of service and privacy policy protect the organization and volunteers from that.
Awesome. More questions have come in. Somebody asked, how many volunteers do you have currently?
Yes, great question. So we've trained 98 volunteers, and over the course, people make the commitment that works for them. So we have some volunteers who have been volunteering for over a year, and we have some who are in the first couple of weeks. We have about 50 active volunteers currently, and our goal is to have 300 by the end of this year.
Excellent, excellent. A couple of people were asking simultaneously about how it was promoted, so we're hearing that. I do have somebody said, and I think it's related to volunteering, how do you handle vacations or emergencies?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Again, we want to be flexible. So when people are like, hey, I need to take I have something happening at work and I have this big project and I need to step back from my commitment for the next 2 weeks, totally great. We just ask for proactive communication about that so that we're able to actively make sure that we have the coverage needed. And if something pops up, there's an emergency, again, we're flexible. And that's why we also have not just scheduled shifts, but flex volunteering as well. So that, in the case of oh my gosh, preschool just closed and I have to go pick up my kid, totally fine. We can tap into other volunteers to help make sure that things are covered.
Awesome, thank you. And then, and I think this is a really interesting question when I think about the context of protecting people legally, because it said it almost seems like it's a combination of coaching and counseling. And what's interesting to me is when you're counseling, you're giving advice, and that's a much higher legal risk. And
yeah, and so I think this is where sort of it's depending on people's interpretation of terms, there can be, we don't give advice. So we'll have people who will ask us can you tell me what to do? And we're like, well, what, it sounds like your gut is telling you this thing. We won't say go do X, Y, or Z. It's counseling in the sense of when people tell us that they feel like they've connected with a counselor, it's because they feel like their emotional needs are getting met. And that's where we see when folks are talking about counseling, it tends to be I'm feeling heard, I'm feeling supported in those ways. But it's not, it's one of those, how do people use language things? Some people will say I've got amazing advice, and you look at the conversation and no advice was given, but that's the word that they're using for what they expect. And again, that's sort of, we try to be really thoughtful about the language and words that people are using. We'll say we don't give advice, we just create the space. But someone will walk away feeling oh my gosh, I got actionable work advice. Then you look at it and you're we didn't tell you anything, but that's great that you feel that way.
Yeah, Jamie, Alexis, I'm going to toss out there. I am, a certified coactive coach. Everything we teach is consistent with coactive coaching. There's nothing therapeutic. There isn't advice giving. I think we are very solidly inside the camp of coaching,
which is very much, of course, in keeping with what we teach. The graduates that you have here have learned that as well, and of course, it's in keeping with the Code of Ethics from the International Coach Federation. So that's awesome. We do have another a question, and that is, what is the presence outside of the U.S.? And I think I know the answer. I'm going to let you go ahead and take the question.
Great question. We have people asking us that regularly, when are you going to be international? And we only provide our service domestically in the United States at this point, although we have volunteers who are outside of the United States. We are open to having volunteers who work internationally for a US-based company. Our approach is culturally relevant to folks who are working in a US-based working environment. But we have volunteers, as I mentioned, like we have one in Vietnam who wants to give back to her community, and her community is a US community, but she is currently based for work in Vietnam. So we're open to volunteers being anywhere, but we serve a population that's based in the US.
Well, I'm hoping to take that a step further. I'm hoping this becomes a model that people can use in other parts of the world, simply because there's such a big push in the coaching world to increase access for everyone. So that's awesome. Excellent. Quite a few people are saying thank you. Let's see, amazing organization. Thank you for the perspective and like-mindedness. I appreciate the work you're doing. Thank you so much. So this is awesome. One person asking, what about Canada?
Yes, culturally much more similar than some other countries we've been asked to go to. Yeah, I mean, again, it's sort of volunteers from anywhere is awesome. We've had folks who we realized afterwards were actually in Canada. In our terms of service, we express that we are a US-based resource. But if someone connects with us over web chat, we don't have a blocker for people coming from an international IP. So again, we ask people to accept those terms of service. The terms of service says that we are a US-based service.
Okay. Awesome. Great. So again, a lot of thanks. Thank you. So interesting. It seems like you've answered all the questions, and the rest of the comments coming in have been really appreciating what you're doing, the concepts, the process, etc. So fabulous, fabulous presentation. Really interesting to consider what it's like coaching in this way. So that's exciting. And we do, of course, want to say both to Val and to Jamie Alexis, we're so glad that you're here, that you did this presentation for us. And thank you so much for all you did. Those of you that are here and are heading out, yes, we'll get that email out to you. I'm going to hang around as long as anyone's here. And Jamie, Alexis, and Val, that's your choice too, how long you want to hang around.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Kathy, and thanks to everyone for joining, and excited to connect with anyone who's interested, as Kathy mentioned, with the email afterwards. I'll be on it, and I'm sure we can add Val in too. And happy to answer any other questions that arise. I know I'm someone who thinks about things afterwards. So if you're one of those too, and something pops up as you're mulling this conversation, we're always happy to be available to answer more questions.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much. It does seem more complete. I think the people that are here are hanging out to see if there's any other great questions. In the meantime, the comments are all the thank yous. So I'm going to say it seems we're ready to go ahead and close this out. So I'll close out the webinar. Thank you again for your presentation and for all you're doing. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy.
Thank you.